It says we're live. Okay, well, we're just gonna go ahead and get started as people trickle in. That'll be great. But yeah, want to welcome everybody in. This is the very first live that I have ever done, both on Substack or on any platform. So this is kind of a work in progress, and yeah, just excited to have this conversation. For those of you who follow my work, I am all about self trust. So as a therapist, that's what my work is about. Now, the work I do as like a writer, speaker, trainer, it's all about empowering women to trust themselves. And what I've seen in really the last decade and a half of doing this work is that we all have different pathways to trusting ourselves and reconnecting to ourselves and our body. And so I'm really excited to start to bring more voices in and to learn about other people's pathways around self trust. So excited today to be having this conversation with Katy Harvey. And she is going to be talking to us all about reconnecting to the body. So you describe yourself as a non-diet dietitian. So I'm so excited to get into that. You are a registered dietitian, and I saw that you have a passion for helping people find peace around food and also with yourself. So I just loved that. So if anybody happens to have, interest in exploring the relationship with your body or relationship with food, you're in the right place. That's what this whole conversation is going to be about today. So thank you so much for joining me, Katy. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm so glad to be here and to have this conversation. I think it's one of those things that, we all have bodies and we all have to eat. And so it's very relatable. And hopefully there will be things that people hear that resonate with them.
Yeah. And I think listening to you talk as well, one of the things that I'm really excited about is you speak into the nuance of intuitive eating and that entire concept in a way that I just haven't heard a lot. And so I just really appreciate
Oh my
your
gosh.
perspective. And so I would love to, yeah, maybe get into some of that today as well.
Sure. Yeah.
We're just gonna jump right in because we're probably only gonna, for those of you that are on the, this live here, we're probably gonna go for maybe like 20 minutes or so. Just kind of keep it short and sweet, give you a little nuggets of wisdom, and then if you want to go deeper with Katy, you can do that. I'm gonna give you all of her information, but we'll just jump right in. So, Katy, you have a podcast titled "Rebuilding Trust with Your Body." So I'm so curious, how did you come up with that name?
Gosh, I remember trying to figure out what I was going to name the podcast and doing like brain dumping all sorts of things and researching to see, who had what other names out there. But I really kept coming back to like, what is the essence of it that I'm trying to help convey? And that was what kept coming back to me is this idea that we need to be able to trust our bodies. And then the idea of rebuilding it, because I do believe that we were born with trust. Like babies aren't questioning, is there too many calories in my bottle or the breast milk? And so it's kind of a coming back to something that is innate within us and that we do have the ability to do. It's just that there's so many ways that our culture has taught us to not trust ourselves and to not trust our bodies.
Yeah. Can you say more about that? Because that's actually a question I get a lot, just kind of being in the idea of self-trust and how did we lose it and did we have it to start with? It's a question I get a lot. So I'm curious to hear
Yeah.
your perspective of, how do we lose it?
I think with food in particular, it's babies and small children are born intuitive eaters. They know when they are hungry, they will demand to eat, and then when they're done, they're done. Whether they needed, a whole bottle or the whole cookie or just a bite of it, and then they're off to do the next thing. There's not this debate internally about, am I allowed to eat more? Should I make myself wait until later? And so all of those signals are built into us, but then it's the world around us that inadvertently starts to teach us to ignore or override those signals. And oftentimes, sadly, it's the well-meaning caregivers in our lives who will say things like, you can't have dessert until you've finished the food on your plate or until you've taken 3 bites of everything, or you can't possibly be hungry right now. We just ate an hour ago. And yes, there is a need for us to have some structure and boundaries with food that is part of the parent's responsibility. But sometimes inadvertently what's happening is we're teaching kids like, don't listen to your body or ignore your hunger, or you need to eat all that food on your plate and then override your fullness because the thing you really wanted was the dessert. And we're inadvertently training them to overeat. And then enter, the age at which we are exposed to diet culture and bodies changing and ideas around good food and bad food and trying to eat less in order to lose weight or avoid weight gain. And all of that just further disconnects us from our body and teaches us these ideas around what's good and bad, right and wrong with food and with our bodies. And I just think it so easily snowballs from there.
Yeah, so the theme I hear in that is we're turning over our answers about what to eat and how much to eat to something external and not going inward for those answers. Like we're
Yeah.
disconnected from the answers within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Okay. So
will
maybe
say, like, to use the go back to the thing with like small children, I'm certainly not suggesting that we should just let kids have a free for all because left to their own devices, they would just subsist on goldfish and fruit snacks all day, every day
Mhm.
because that's what tastes good and what's easy. And kids without any structure around food will easily just kind of snack through the day and they won't sit down and eat a meal with balance and stuff. And so yes, adults do need to help provide some degree of structure and variety and all of that. But we can do that in a way that still fosters the self trust and the connection with the body. And that is a really important thing that I love to teach to parents. And for anyone interested, if you look up Division of Responsibility from Ellen Sauter, she's got so many great resources on that.
Okay, that's great. That's great to have that resourceful. That maybe that segues into a little bit of the intuitive eating because I think
Sure.
that is a misconception that I hear and that I felt like when I was first learning about intuitive eating it's a free for all and that you're just going to eat
Right.
donuts for every meal. And it's like, so tell
Yeah.
us a little bit. I know it's a pretty in depth and there's like what, like 10 different elements to it or something. Like
Yep.
it's more complex than I think people make it out to be. And so
Yeah.
I know we can't get into all of it, but what are the most important parts of intuitive eating
Yeah.
from your perspective?
Gosh, yeah. It's like you said, there's so much we can get into. But I will say, okay, to kind of start with, a lot of times people will assume that they know what it means when we say the phrase intuitive eating. And there tends to be different interpretations of this. Some people hear that and they think, oh, you're saying I should just eat whatever I want whenever I want. And my answer to that is no, that is impulsive eating, not intuitive eating. Those are very different things. Because
Mhm.
if you're just eating whatever pops into your head whenever, you're not actually checking with your body. You're not even asking, am I hungry? And is this what's going to satisfy me? You're just grabbing what is in front of you. And then sometimes the other interpretation is eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. And that's a
Heard
vast
that one a lot.
oversimplification. Yeah, it's when we talk about intuitive eating, there are 10 principles, and these come from the original book called Intuitive Eating, where this concept came from. It was developed by 2 registered dietitians, and it's got well over 200 studies to back it at this point. So it is evidence based. There's 10 principles they outline in their book, and 2 out of the 10 are hunger and fullness. So, like, yes, that's part of it, but it's 20% of it. So much of it is the mental side of our relationship with food and being able to make peace with food and let go of all of the judgments and the rules and the shame that we feel around food and all of the shoulds and shouldn'ts. And because a lot of times it's all of this like mental baggage we're carrying around from diet culture and the messages we've received that interferes with us being able to connect with hunger, with fullness, with satisfaction, and also with things like emotions that might show up as sensations in your body that sometimes we confuse with hunger or the desire to eat.
Mhm. Mhm. Oh my gosh, there's so much there. Yeah.
Yes.
And I like that you bring up the idea of it's the relationship that you have with food, like, so much of this work is always relational. It's
Yeah.
not about the food, it's about digging underneath and what's that relationship there. But I think as with anything, we can kind of polarize and we can kind of swing to these opposite sides of things, and so I'm sure you see that a lot with, people that you work with of being so almost like dogmatic about the
Yes.
messages on food and then almost like swinging to this like what you described. I like that differentiation of like impulsive eating versus
Mhm.
intuitive eating. And so when somebody maybe is swinging in the extremes, like where do you start with people to help them to actually tune in to their body?
Yeah. So, 2 things. The first is I actually do encourage a little bit of structure as stepping stones to being more intuitive. So, this is very counterintuitive, but I encourage people to start with a bit of an eating schedule because a lot of times we're so disconnected from our hunger and fullness signals, and sometimes our digestive system's kind of messed up that it's very difficult to truly know when we are hungry and to trust that. And so by eating at a continual or a consistent schedule without being rigid around
Mhm.
it, but giving your body reliable and predictable opportunities to eat, then your body is going to start to know and trust that food is coming. And it's going to get your hunger and fullness signals and your appetite hormones and your digestive enzymes into a good rhythm that makes it easier to know when you're hungry. And so starting off with consistent eating schedule, and that would mean, 3 meals a day generally, snacks in between, not going longer than about 3 or 4 hours without eating something, as a way to show your body, hey, I am here to nourish you, not to deprive you. And then the next thing is when you're going to eat, to ask yourself these 3 questions is, am I hungry? And if yes, we
Like
want you to go ahead and
simple, important
eat.
question.
Yeah. Yeah. And if no, to ask yourself, okay, what am I feeling right now? What is it that I need? And then, but if the answer is yes, that you are hungry, what do you want? What sounds good? What does your body need? So let's say something that sounds good is, I don't know, Cheez Its. Great. Okay, what does my body need? Well, Cheez Its are going to break down into carbohydrates. That's quick energy. Maybe I need some protein or some fiber to go with that so it sticks with me longer. So maybe I'll have those Cheez Its with, um, like a cheese stick or some nuts and maybe like some, I don't know, berries or some apple slices or something for some fiber. And now we've got a combination that's going to taste good and satisfy that craving for the Cheez-Its, but we're also going to fuel your body as well so that you don't feel like you need to eat the whole box of Cheez-Its. So what do I want? What does my body need? And then what do I have available to me? Because you also have to work with what you got in the moment too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that a lot, and it's, so in my, uh program, I work with, like, training other therapists and other practitioners around the self-trust model, and there's a dietitian who I'm working with, and this is an area that we've talked about a lot, and like, I am not a dietitian, this is not my area of expertise, but something that her and I have explored is this idea of exactly what you said, almost it feeling counterintuitive at first, to bring structure and to actually, for a while, having that structure. It doesn't mean that you're always gonna have to have you're not gonna be asking yourself those questions that forever, but in the beginning, until you have more, regulation, more nervous system regulation, more access to the cues and the language of your body, like, you do have to slow down and, that structure can really help you to understand the language of your body better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's going to take a minute for it to become truly intuitive and second nature. I think sometimes the phrase intuitive it can be a little bit misleading that like it should just feel easy and natural at first. And it's probably not going to because we've been outsourcing the wisdom of our body for so long and it's going to take a minute to get reconnected with that and to trust what it is that our bodies are telling us.
Yes, yeah, I wanna, like, double down on that so big because, like, just setting the expectations for people that intuitive eating is not going to be easy right away, and it may not feel intuitive right away, and that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong, it doesn't mean, it's not
Yeah.
working or that you're bad, it just means that, of course, like, if you've, the phone's been off the hook for a long time, like, it's gonna take
Yeah.
time to reestablish that connection, and so having grace and patience with yourself as you start to relearn the language of your body is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it is. It's so much of that grace and being willing to recognize that the things that feel like you messed up or the mistakes, those are learning opportunities. And so instead of going into all this like shame and judgment and feeling like you need to punish yourself or fix it if you do something like overeat, let's say, instead, if we get genuinely curious about what happened and why, then we can learn from that. And those incidents will happen less frequently over time because we start to do things that will ultimately help prevent it. But if we just go into the shame spiral, then sometimes it just makes things worse and kind of compounds the issue.
Yeah. Yeah, but when we're able to slow down and get curious, then we're able to zoom out and see the patterns, and then we can, tweak things we can understand ourselves.
Yeah.
And again, that relational piece, and then you get to pivot in ways that actually feel aligned with what you want to be doing and what your goals are.
Yes, exactly.
Mm. Okay, so talk to me about, because I'm making an assumption here that the work you do with clients, yeah, it might be about food, but I'm assuming that when they start to rebuild trust with food and with their body and have more peace and less diet culture noise, rambling in their head all the time, I'm assuming that trickles to other parts of their life. Would that be
Oh
a
my
true
gosh.
assumption?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
To me, it's like food is sort of the symbolic way that so much of this is playing out, but it does tie into or kind of represents so many other things in their life. And oftentimes our relationship with food, whether it be compulsive eating, whether it be restricting, whether it be dieting or just obsessing about food, sometimes that's kind of the scapegoat for the other things in our life that we are numbing or avoiding or suppressing or somehow
Mhm.
coping with. And those things start to come more to the forefront as our relationship with food kind of takes its proper place in our life, where it's not like it's important. We obviously have to nourish ourselves, and food is a wonderful source of enjoyment and connection. But when food is no longer disproportionately consuming our life, pun intended,
Mhm.
those other things can be addressed. And sometimes those things are painful, sometimes they're scary. And that part can be hard, but it's also the most healing in my experience. And it's not until that piece happens that somebody truly typically has peace with food and with their body that's going to be longer lasting.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely saw that so much in my work with people. They would come in and maybe they wanted to focus on the food because you said, like, sometimes it's the scapegoat, but then when we were able to, get a little distance from it and realize, "Oh, this is just a symptom. This is a manifestation of," or, kind of like, "Hey, look over here," so that you don't look over here. And
Yes,
so really kind of exploring it more holistically and how it fits into all the dynamics of your life, or how it might be a microcosm of something else that's going on in your life.
absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes, I don't know if you see this in your work, but sometimes just our overall kind of personality traits might show up in our relationship with food. That if we tend to be very kind of like type A and needing things to be a certain way and kind of controlling. Sometimes we try to exert that over food. And sometimes if we feel sort of chaotic in these other areas of our life, sometimes that plays out with food. And a lot of times the way that we are relating to food can be very parallel to the way that we're relating to other things in our lives.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and for me, that brings up, like, the parts work, and so the way that you just described that of, like, oh, controlling around food, it's like, okay, so you have a part of you that wants to control the
Yeah,
food. Does this part wanna control anything else in your life? Does this part feel out of control in any other area? So it's really getting curious about what that part's role is in
yeah,
your life, and, yeah, being able to expand the perspective beyond just food. So it's again like food sometimes can be the entry point, and then seeing how does this play out in all these other areas.
yeah, absolutely.
So I guess coming back to the original question, like what have you seen when people do this work around their relationship with food and they find more peace with food and with their body, what's the ripple effect? What happens on the other side? Like why is it worth it?
Gosh. Um, It's hard for me to even know how to put that into words because it's like it's so worth it. So I think it's like when you are no longer tormented by food or the hatred of what you see when you look in the mirror, you're able to be more fully engaged in your life. You know, I've got a trip coming up next week. I'm not sitting here obsessing over, oh my gosh, what are we going to eat on the road? What snacks am I going to like allow myself to pack for myself or the kids in the car? What if we have to eat fast food? Oh my gosh, I'm going to be in my swimsuit. I probably should restrict carbs all week. I'm not thinking like that about it. I'm not distracted by all of that. I can just be more excited and practical about getting ready for the trip and what's going to work as far as food goes, and it's just not that big of a deal. Or um it's like food can be, sometimes we need to make adjustments for our health, let's say, and we might need
Mhm.
to add in more fiber or have some boundaries with carbs or things like that. And instead of those things becoming this like kind of diety thing in our mind, we can go, okay, this is what I need to do to take care of my body. How can I do that in a way that still allows me to enjoy food? And again, like you can honor your health, you can honor your connections in your life, and it doesn't have to boil down to was I good or bad today with my eating.
Yeah. 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 That's really beautiful. So thinking about, yeah, this idea of pathways to trust yourself more. It sounds like you know this um, pretty in depth through your work with clients, but also like your own experience of rebuilding trust with yourself. So I'm just wondering if there's any, yeah, like final words of wisdom, any tidbits that you would want to share with somebody who's maybe just starting to rebuild that relationship with their body and get curious about their relationship with food. Is there any yeah, starting point that you'd wanna share with them?
I would say two things. One thing that I will never forget, just on my own personal journey, if you want to call it that, was I was in therapy one day and my therapist asked me, what is it that you would be like thinking about or worrying about in your life if you weren't worrying so much about food all the time? And it was like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like it's that thing we were talking about a minute ago that sometimes the food and the weight and the body worries become our way of not looking at what else is going on.
Mhm.
And so to maybe ask yourself that when you're having those moments where you're feeling really stressed out or bothered by food or your body image or the number on the scale, like what else would you be thinking about or worrying about if it wasn't those things? And sometimes the answer is obvious, sometimes it's not, but that's a good starting point.
Mhm.
And then the other thing I would say is for someone getting started, it's very normal and it's pretty expected in the world that we live in that you are going to be scared and maybe even terrified about what is going to happen to your weight if you start being more permissive with food. Of
Mhm.
course, you feel that way. And that's one of the biggest things that we have to look at and work through. And that's part of building trust with your body is allowing your body to figure out what does it want to weigh when you're not trying to control your food, when you're not battling against your body, when you're working with your body and with your metabolism. What does that look like? And how do you then learn to accept whatever that is? Because there is a decent chance that that weight might be higher than you would want it to be or than society would want it to be. And there's just a lot to be unpacked around that. And for so many reasons. I mean, we live in a society full of weight stigma and anti-fat bias. And so you've got to be willing to look at that piece of things. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to truly make peace with food.
Yeah. Yeah, not like pretending that those fears aren't there doesn't make them go
Sure.
away. And so, yeah, really kind of shining light on those fears on the front and making space for them. One thing that when you said at the beginning or what your therapist said to you, I love that. And then I also want to maybe offer like a different perspective on that or maybe an additional perspective is um the idea that, okay, if you weren't so consumed all the time with worrying about food and calories and intake and tracking, like what else would you be worried about? Because it, yeah, it kind of, it might illuminate maybe the underlying concern that
Right.
you're wanting to look at. But also, like, if you didn't have so much time counting calories and thinking about all the food and thinking, consumed with all those messages, like, what else would you want to be doing that could be exciting?
Sure.
Like, what else could you have space for?
Yeah, it doesn't have
Or
to be
like,
like bad things that you would be focusing on because who
yeah,
wants to do that, right?
yeah, it's like, oh, what else would I be worried about? It's like, yeah, that's helpful, but also just like, what, yeah, what could you think
Yes. What
more
else
of?
do you want your life to be full of? Yeah, 1,000,000%.
Yeah,
Yes.
like, how many more books could you read, or how many
Yeah.
more like your rabbit holes of exciting like topics could you get to learn about because you have more brain capacity? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or what would you go do? Like, would you go out and like do line dancing or some new hobby or even just putting yourself out there if you weren't so self-conscious about your body and worrying about your food. Like, yeah, I think your life gets bigger when you're not always obsessing over these things.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Your life gets bigger. Yeah,
Mhm.
more fuller,
Yeah.
more expansive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which in and of itself could be some fears there. So there's so many layers.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know I had said we're going to keep it about 20, 25 minutes. So we want to be respectful of everybody's time and go ahead and wrap up. How can people reach out to you if they want to hear more or learn more about you and your work? I know you've got the podcast, but yeah, tell us about all the ways to connect
Sure.
with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got close to 200 episodes over on my podcast, so you can go kind of scroll through and see whatever jumps out there. It's called Rebuilding Trust with Your Body. As far as being able to actually connect with me, I'm pretty active on Instagram. My DMs are always open. I'm the one who reads and responds to everything. So come say hello over there. I would love to connect.
Awesome. And you're new on Substack. So
I'm
everybody
new
should
to Substack.
give
Hello.
you
I
some
love
love
it
there.
already.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Everybody go give her some love, follow her content there. And yeah, thank you so much for just having this conversation. It was a great way to start the week.
Awesome. This was fun. Thanks, Emily.
Bye.